Professor Sthaneshwar with us. Before discovering his work, etc., some people who are not familiar. So it's recently I was familiar with his writing nonetheless. But we had so many people who were common friends, but it's just that we could never sort of meet. And today, this time, Dharma Karma Samyoga has come and we have this opportunity to meet, and I welcome you. And when I heard that he is going to be in Bangalore, so I was the first one to sort of reach him out to make sure that we will steal some of his family time, to have a nice conversation and get him to familiarize and bringing him to Chanakya University so that we can have our ongoing conversation with us. And this occasion turned out to be very pleasing because we have some more interesting personalities who have come along with Professor Sthaneshwar to the Chanakya University. So we have Professor Stony there from Stony, Brook. He's a linguist. We know his work both through his linguistics and also through his translation recently, which has come from Murthy's classic. And we have Professor Krishnamurti Hanu, who is also a very legendary figure in the Kannada literary circles. And we have many more people along with Sthaneshwar's group, who have been here. And it is indeed an extremely pleasing occasion. And this occasion was just to generally to get a familiarity with his work, to look at our common concerns about how Indian traditions have been studied by the modern social scientific ideology kinds of discipline, and what are the challenges and how do we sort of reclaim our traditions through decolonization process and what is its future. And Sthaneshwar being in the United States, engaging in this task for a long time, we want him to sort of talk about it generally. And we have some other plan in the long run with Chanakya University, specifically around his work on Tantra that we wanted to do in the subsequent time. But to begin with, we wanted to start just to get him to the university. We have organized this talk. In order to start this occasion, I want my colleague Sai Swarupa here to sort of start with the Prarthana. Devi Stuti, please.
Namaste, Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. वैष्णवी भार्गवी वाग्देवी त्रिगुणात्मिके विन्ध्यविलासिनि वाराहि त्रिपुराम्बिके वैष्णवी भार्गवी वाग्देवी त्रिगुणात्मिके विन्ध्यविलासिनि वाराहि त्रिपुराम्बिके भवती विद्या देहि भगवती सर्वार्थसाधिके सत्यार्थचन्द्रिके मां पाहि महनीय मन्त्रात्मिके मां पाहि मातङ्गी मायात्मिके मां पाहि महनीय मन्त्रात्मिके मां पाहि मातङ्गी मायात्मिके आपाकमधुरमो सङ्गीतमो वञ्चितसङ्गातमो सञ्चितसङ्केतमो आपाकमधुरमो सङ्गीतमो वञ्चितसङ्गातमो सञ्चितसङ्केतमो श्रीभारती क्षीरसम्प्राप्तमो अमृतसम्पादमो सुकृतसम्पादमो श्रीभारती क्षीरसम्प्राप्तमो अमृतसम्पादमो सुकृतसम्पादमो सरिगमस्वरध्वनि सारवरोधिनि सामसुनादविनोदिनि सकलकलाकल्याणि सुवासिनि श्रीरागालयवासिनि मां पाहि मकरन्द मन्दाकिनी मां पाहि सुज्ञानसंवर्धिनी वैष्णवी भार्गवी वाग्देवी त्रिगुणात्मिके विन्ध्यविलासिनि वाराहि त्रिगुणात्मिके आलोचनामृतमु साहित्यमु सहितहितसत्यमु शारदास्तन्यमु आलोचनामृतमु साहित्यमु सहितहितसत्यमु शारदास्तन्यमु सारस्वताक्षरसारथ्यमु ज्ञानसाम्राज्यमु जन्मसाफल्यमु सारस्वताक्षरसारथ्यमु ज्ञानसाम्राज्यमु जन्मसाफल्यमु सरसवचोक्तिनि सारसलोचनि वाणी पुस्तकधारिणि वर्णालङ्कृतवैभवशालिनि वरकविता चिन्तामणि मां पाहि सालोक्य सन्धायिनी मां पाहि श्रीचक्रसिंहासनी वैष्णवि भार्गवि वाग्देवी त्रिगुणात्मिके विन्ध्यविलासिनि वाराहि त्रिपुराम्बिके भवती विद्यां देहि भगवति सर्वार्थसाधिके सत्यार्थचन्द्रिके मां पाहि महनीयमनुरात्मिके मां पाहि मातङ्गी मायात्मिके.
Thank you, Sai Swarupa. I mean, see, I was talking to Sai Swarupa about a contemporary person who has created a Devi Stuti, and this is composed by Vanilla Sitaram Shastri Garu, who has kept the Telugu cinema industry with a lot of Indian tradition. And once in a while, fantastic songs come from that, and Sitaram Shastri Garu is one of the greatest, writer who has produced wonderful songs in the Telugu industry. So she has picked it up. Well, thank you very much. Now I would request Vinay to introduce Sthaneshwar.
Namaste. Professor Sthaneshwar is known to everyone, but it's formal responsibility to introduce him to this august audience here. Completing his education in a Gurukul tradition, he completed his masters from Sampurnananda University in Kashi. After that, he started a tantric studies program in Nepal, and then after a few years reaching there, he went to Martin Luther University in Germany, where he did his PhD in Advaita Vedanta, specifically focusing on what we call as Drishti Srishti Vada. After completing his PhD from there, he then went to US. I think from there onwards, he has been at San Diego University from 2005 onwards, where he has been working for nearly 3 decades in the areas of Hindu studies, comparative philosophy and comparative religion. That's been where his contribution has been. And currently he occupies the Mattoo chair for classical Indic studies at Stony Brook University, from where we have Professor S. Sridhar as well. Apart from his teaching, he is also known as an author of authentic books belonging to the tradition. He has written at least 4 to 5 books belonging to Drishti Srishti Vada, and then one of his books published by Routledge Studies, that is Consciousness in Indian Tradition, is quite a popular book, and then a couple of books on Tantra is also well known for all the seekers of Tantra. While all this is his formal introduction, I think what appeals to most of us is his capability to hold both scholarship as well as a practitioner's perspective, which is quite rare. While some people who are scholars, they tend to become very clinical and loose and become very dry, and perhaps rather than doing service to the tradition, they do more disservice. Whereas here you have a person who on one side is more than a professor, is Acharya Sthaneshwar Timalsina, who brings it into practice, he teaches. So this is a rare combination of a scholar practitioner's perspective is what the kind of new scholarship that we hope to create more in India, and he stands as a tower representing such kind of a tradition. And since 2019 onwards, he has started Vimarsha Foundation, body, a platform dedicated to spread the teachings of classical Indian tradition, specifically focusing on the Tantra tradition. And one of the again specialities of Professor Timalsina is that he is initiating a lot of people who are very keen into sadhana, into Tantra sadhana. He is not holding anything back. That's a generosity of a teacher, no? To give, and to give. So wherever he goes, he travels, he meets people. There are quite large number of workshops, series and classes that are conducted, and ever ready to give. If you listen to his talk, even it could be 1 hour talk, he'll jam pack the information which you need at least 4 to 5 hours to later sit and listen to him. That's the kind of knowledge he has and his willingness to share, and we are about to witness the same. Once again, thank you, sir, for coming here.
It's over to Sthaneshwar ji, but I must say that along with academic etc., he is also one of the fascinating composer of Sanskrit poetry. Very soon there will be a performance of his compositions in Bangalore city itself. You know, a 2 hours classical concert will happen based on his. 14th. It's on 14th in Indira Nagar. I will share the respective detail. Sir, it's over to you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Please, all of you, do come to the 14th event. I will not talk post-colonialism or anything. We'll just sing there together. Thank you so much, Chaityaji, Vinay Chandraji, and I know you have open-heartedly invited me to your home, and I feel like coming back home actually, although this is my first time being here, but I do know that there will be many occasions, and I'm honored Professor S.N. Sridharji has come from long distance, honestly, Minadi, Professor Kamal Sridhar, and professors I have not met formally introduced before, so I'm honored with your presence. Here, time is limited, and so that I don't entirely waste your time, I will not go through all the things that have been already written and have come in discourse in this post-colonial criticism, starting from Edward Said, Homi Bhabha, Dalmar, in Beyond Orientalism, like scholars like William Halfas, Eli Franco, Ramchandra Duggal, to name a few. What I would like is a paradigm shift, even for the very conversation on post-colonialism or beyond Orientalism. And for that, I would like to start from one small example from classical Sanskrit, from Panini. Panini, we all know, wrote a perfect Sanskrit grammar, so perfect that no other grammar could compete. That is a lie. Katyayana wrote more criticisms to Panini than Paninian Sutras itself. He has demonstrated all the limitations of where Panini's Sutras do not apply. And even in Patanjali, we do not just simply see buttressing of Paninian arguments. He's balancing the arguments between Panini and Katyayana. But what we know for a fact is that everything Katyayana said belongs to Paninian grammar. Meaning the criticism of Katyayana is not something separate from Panini's grammar itself. When we read Panini's grammar, we also incorporate Katyayana's commentary and Patanjali's rebuttal. This is a fact. When Gangesha composed the book of logic, Tattva Chintamani, after that, thinking logically became thinking like Gangesha. All the criticisms of the definitions that Gangesha gave were subsumed and came the rebuttal on Gangesha's way of thinking. I don't think that there has been any rethinking beyond Gangesha in India. So you can, I'm not saying everybody has accepted Gangesha's definitions, but the model Gangesha established became the standard bearer for thinking. Those who came to Avachedaka continued their thoughts, including the Madhvas and the Advaita Vedantins, But those who could not deal with Avachedaka vanished in the time, like the Buddhist philosophers and the Jain philosophers. So now I said I will be talking on decolonizing India, and why am I bringing Paninian example or Gangesha's example is what I have observed is the entire criticism of colonialism is like Patanjali's criticism or Katyayana's criticism of Panini. They will be just a subset of the colonial studies, and that does not do the service of getting out of the prism, throwing the bag altogether and rethinking. You can talk all around whether you like the scholarship of Mointy-Doniger or you vilify her. In all accounts, you are helping her sell more books. It does not help you to think outside of her paradigm. You can keep showing the limitations in those works. You are simply writing a commentary upon those works and you are not helping a new thinking. So what we have to do is, if we are serious about rethinking, decolonizing Indian thinking, we have to come up with a unique framework that is not rooted in colonial thinking, but that is not also developed in a dialogue as a critique to colonial thinking. Because the very critique to colonial thinking, in my opinion, is a subset to the very colonial thinking. It does not help us go outside of the paradigm. Keeping these in mind, I again would not like to repeat some of the works I have done. I will just mention 5 of my articles that aim to explore a new foundation for this new type of study that I have dreamt about. The first I wrote is around 2014, Indigenous Epistemology and Placing the Cultural Self in Crisis. In this essay, I have argued that as long as the self, the studying subject, is not open to place his own subjectivity into crisis, he is not willing to study the subject. And for that, I can go to Buddhist critique of the self, Vedanta critique of the self, Tantric critique of the self, always this taboo of subjectivity, one of the easy books by that has come, Ellen's book, Taboo of Subjectivity. We have to rethink, because the Western paradigm is very much of a dualistic paradigm of the subject and object, and there is this true bare object, and you are trying to put yourself, place yourself outside of the field of the studies. You are simply confirming your ego, and you are never willing to let go of your ego and surrender to the truth itself. And that paradigm will never let us have the recognition, at least not when we are willing to think through Indian philosophy. In the next Tantra in Cross-Cultural Context, a paper I wrote, I have demonstrated how Tantra, a very exotic thing for India and the West, has become an object either of romanticism or vilification. Exactly fits in Edward Said's Orientalistic paradigm. And in this critique, I have not left India anyway behind and blamed the West. Both are the culprits in vilifying Tantra in whatever the way they like. And so what would it be to think like a Tantric? And if that amounts to becoming a Kapalika, I am more than willing to. But I just think that the paradigm we have given to think for Tantra, just being an example, it's just a case study. And we do that to our cultural products all the time. So one at a time, we have either the romantic or negative presentations, and that again stops us from piercing through the wall and seeing the truth for once. In the dialogical manifestation of reality in the agamas, there is this strong demand that we rewrite Hindu philosophy to fit making comparative theology or making Hindu theology. There's just also a strong demand in the West, and it will come soon here also. And what I am arguing, also in my another paper, dialogue and culture, parameters of cultural dialogue. So I am placing dialogue as foundational to truth. That dialogue subsumes even the truth. Dialogue comes before the revelation or the discovery of the truth. Not that there is the truth that we are dialoguing about. I say, I'm inviting you to my kitchen, not to the dining table. That is the way I like to think with you. So what I mean by inviting to the kitchen, that is where you cut your vegetables, you pick up your spices, you don't have the dishes. It's in the process of making. It's messy. It's not organized. It's not refined. But it is true, it's real. It's in process. So what we are used to is a refined product. But what I mean to serve is a process of thinking that thought should not be refined and posed. Thought should be open and dialogical. And I'm thinking that all these thinkings, like when we think Advaita Vedanta as a project completed by Shankaracharya, we are thinking in the same Judeo-Christian paradigm of the prophets. That Padmapada or Sthaneshwar did not think that Guruji has already completed all that is there to be done. They are critiquing Shankaracharya. Read closely. If we read Chitsukacharya or Madhusudanacharya, they are not simply citing Shankara or glorifying Shankara. They are redefining all the categories. And that is when we are thinking like Indians. As long as we are simply keeping their ideals from our historical figures in the prophetic sense and simply trying to propagate the ideas as a complete project and not rethinking through those and beyond those categories, or when we think that thinking is a project completed in the past, we are thinking again in the same biblical lines that you do not keep rewriting the Bible. But in here, if we are trying to think like Indians, there is no completed project. Thinking can never be a completed project. Thinking is a process. And that is when we can rethink even for the issue of decolonizing India. It has to come up not through me, but in dialogue with you. So, in reconstructing Abhinav Gupta's philosophy of power, so what all of that led me to was in this paper, reconstructing Abhinav's philosophy of power, starting from Nietzsche. What I have observed is the entire Western enterprise of power is a socio-political power, a brute force. And we have subsumed all other forms of power within socio-political power. And our critique of all other issues, whether that is psychological, political, economic, philosophical, every single issue becomes a subset of political power. Even Axel Michels would agree, I think, with me, because I've read his small introductory book on Hinduism, and there he brings how power in India were categorically different, in the sense that, let me give you one simple example of one Baba in Nepal, in a village called Charipur. I met him many years back, now he's no more. So this man from the Tibeto-Burmese Brahman family, who are not Brahminic, not reading Vedas, when he was 5 or 6, he met a guru and he initiated him into Gayatri Mantra. Generally, from the traditional Brahminic context, you don't initiate somebody coming from like a Tibeto-Burmese family into Gayatri Mantra. And this man goes and meditates for 45 years in Kalinchok hill up in 16,000 feet, and around his later age, like a 55, 60, he comes down, and then He established the Vedic studies school, and now that the entire village has turned into Sanskrit village, and nobody questioned his authority. My point has nothing to do with glorifying this tapasvi, but my point is to recognize a power that is very different from political power. He goes to the hub of Brahminic village and then tells them what they need to do. And every single Brahmin, like when I went to the village, is just surrendering to him, frustrating him. He's not that well educated, he's just simply refined with his tapas. So I'm bringing this tapas as a separate category of power because Axel Michaels also accepts, we always have to justify, some Westerner is with me, so don't blame me, I'm not that wrong. But my point is, not every form of power is a subset of political power. In our society, we do not follow somebody simply because he's a powerful man. And he's a powerful man not in the sense of a socio-political or economic power. So there are these stratification of power, and as long as we are not willing to rethink the way power is distributed in Indian culture, we are not decolonizing power itself, and as long as we are not willing to decolonize power, we are not willing to decolonize any of our socio-economic structures, political structures. So then what are we type? I love Wilhelm Handfast for all his limitations. In his book India and Europe, he makes two keen observations. One, India is a closed civilization that, like the Westerners or even Chinese, always coming to India, trying to learn about it, and sometimes make good observations, maybe many times not make too much good observations. Even the Persians came and started translating Upanishad or Yoga Vasishtha or all. Civilizationally, we have not been interested in studying other civilizations. That's one observation he makes. And another observation is, as soon as an Indian becomes a philosopher, he starts talking Immanuel Kant and Heidegger, Martin Heidegger. That's how we think. So there it is. I could not let go of these two observations he makes. That becomes a stamp. And I love my dear brother Arindam Chakrabarti, and there is another eminent philosopher of our time, Jonathan Connery. In his book, both have written substantially on rationality in Indian philosophy, and Jonathan wrote a whole book on rationality. So what we are trying to do is reinvent the Renaissance of India, not the way that works for India, but the way it worked for the West. That because rationality was completely a taboo for thinking outside of the religious framework in the West for a very long dark period, and what we are thinking is if we write Indian philosophy in the way the rationalist Renaissance worked in the West, then we will once and for all establish Indian philosophy as a true philosophy. And what I believe that will do as a consequence, starting from B.K. Matilal, whom I revere the most, is we are simply writing a footnote for the analytical philosophy, and we are subsuming our rationality as a subset of Western mode of rationality. We are, in the postmodern world, we have to also deconstruct rationality, because there is not just one type of rationality. And ultimately, what is the goal of rational thinking? We need to think through that, and particularly because I do philosophy, what it is for an Indian philosopher to do philosophy, what does it amount to? And where I have come right now after the Gurukulas and trying to fit in the West and then not fitting and trying to refit and trying to fit in India, and particularly it's impossible to fit in India because India has not really intellectually discovered herself. So this is where I find it is what were our premises of doing philosophy? do we consider, like of course I already joked about how the Calcutta University denied in the philosophy department to think about Abhinavagupta, but let's say we decolonize these departments and do philosophy, read Abhinavagupta or read Gangesha or read, let's start from the early thinkers, Badarayana. Is Vedanta philosophy or not? If it is, Badarayana. Let's do Akshapada Gautama. Let's do Patanjali. Let's go to Kanada. Why is he Kanada? I mean, because he was so poor, not poor, he couldn't eat anywhere. Come on. Why is he Akshapada? Like he was blind. So, what is the notion of rishis? Why were these philosophers considered rishis? They lived philosophy. So that living philosophy is absolutely a taboo in the modern Western philosophizing. Because there are two types of things I critique my own Western philosopher friends, that simply an excessive stress on naturalization of philosophies. And what that does as a consequence is a mechanization of human reality, that we are a subset of machines. So there is nothing additional to being human than just being any other thing, entity, like my laptop. We are very sophisticated type of laptops, like if that's a calculator, I'm a laptop. Something like that. So if we think that we want to decolonize doing Indian philosophy, I would assume that the original way of philosophy was done in the West, like in Socratic times, was again not the way it is done today. So I don't believe that the task of a philosopher is just simply to create some categories, like what Gilles Deleuze would say, deterritorialization, like introducing some categories and then subsuming those categories under some other categories. For that, we would have to explore how can we start rethinking. And this rethinking, almost in some intuitive way of the flash of pratibha coming within us, I would invoke, let's say, Fritz Stahl in his book at one point says that asking an Indian about Indian study is asking an ant about zoology. Basically, what would an elephant know about the elephant behavior? So that comes under this very premise of the subjectivity and objectivity. That is the ethic and ethic when they apply for religious studies, cultural studies, that we have the ethic privilege, meaning I am outside of the subject, therefore I am free to study, I am liberated from it, and people who are very much involved in that will not have objectivity. And I don't want to start criticizing them without giving the rationale for developing the idea that if someone is involved in a crime, you can't just ask him to make a judgment. Of course, we know that somebody who is very much into believing a paradigm is not going to be a proper judge of the idea. But the way we constituted a dialogue to give privilege of the outside thinker over the people living through those experiences dehumanizes the human itself, that human experiences are subjective. We have our phenomenalists and we have our phenomenology, that if you want to just talk to a doctor about my feeling of my pain, and simply doctor analyzes about the triggering of certain neurons, a friend of mine has gotten some Botox over his ear for his migraine problem, severe migraine problem. So what we are telling is that pain is something nothing more than the triggering of the neurons, and it is something completely taken care of by putting some Botox there, or maybe suspending the transmission of the information that the neuron monks are doing. Is that what pain is about? Has that analysis of pain been a complete analysis? So I am not saying something very new. All I'm saying is if there is an objective analysis of pain, it is never complete without the subjective analysis of pain. Because pain is we all feel, it is personal. And no matter how much we use painkiller and suppress the pain, that doesn't mean that the pain has been recognized, pain has been understood and removed. It's like we are only blocking the sensation, blocking the transmission of the information. So, to now give a few examples and remind me when there's 5 minutes left, you can just give me a hand. So, what I believe we have to do is go for the deep categories. And to go for the deep categories, I get one insight from Patanjali and another insight from Abhinavagupta. From Patanjali, Tadeva Arthamatra Nirvasa Swarupa Shunyam Iva Samadhi. Swarupa Shunyam Iva, as if your self-identity has been erased to zero, to empty state. And then Arthamatra Nirvasa, you are exposed to the bare particular, the bare object. So, what is the phenomenology of doing yoga? What is knowing the truth, recognizing the reality? Patanjali already tells us that in our everyday experience, our experiences are enmeshed with memories and impressions from the past and all our biases that he calls vasanas. And as long as we are not able to suspend all the vasanas, we will not be seeing the bare object as it is. Like if I see a snake, I will start running. I would not be making an objective judgment about the snake. I would be having my own subjective reaction to seeing the snake. Therefore, I understand that Patanjali himself gives a far better phenomenology for recognizing reality, to see the bare object by completely suspending our subjectivity. Stage number 1. Stage number 2, but then that reaching to the bare particular is not sufficient from Abhinavaguptian perspective of succession. Just recently I was offering a workshop on Kalikakrama, and the whole analysis is the reduction even of the objectivity. Because this objectivity is not a pure object, is not the bare thing, is not as it is. Even that, just by reducing subjectivity, when we imagine that we have reached to the bare particular, we have not done the service to actually recognizing reality. So we have to now suspend the very notion of objectivity also. Because objectivity is itself a cultural product. And as long as we are not willing to question objectivity just by questioning subjectivity, we should not believe, we should not presume that we have actually recognized. That is the fundamental problem of all the Western colonial studies, that by just separating their subjectivity, what they assume is whatever is given to them is an independent object. They never question their very way of the constitution of object, and that to me is very problematic. Then I will go to critiquing. Most of the readings, they read whatever is happening today. I'm citing like really ancient rishis from the West too. I'll cite Hegel and Max Weber. For Hegel, please read Philosophy of History. My book is torn in multiple places, not because I read it, I did read it many times, but because I could not control my own emotional response and not throw the book to the wall many times when I was reading the book. So this is a normal process of having a dialogue with the text and the author from historical times. the way he constructs India, the way he assumes Indianness and thinking. It's just like we are bare object, incapable of having any rationality. But that doesn't mean that we shall spend our studies. We have to faithfully study. I have got some criticism in my own indigenous epistemology. I have tried to bring a faithful criticism of Hegel. And then in Max Weber, I find two very interesting points. His Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism is a very good book of showing the roots of capitalism grounded on Protestant ethics. Today's India is a capitalist India, and in that sense, it's a very much Protestant India too. So, if we are not willing to critique the way we have blindly incorporated capitalism, we are not willing to engage in the very construction of our social realities. And he also introduced, Max Weber introduced one more thing, internal colonialism. He says that he divided colonialism in two different ways. One is the outsiders trying to colonize a culture, another is insiders trying to colonize a culture. Like after 20 years, I went to Bhubaneswar, and I was happy to see that that just looked like my nearby hometown. The process of Biharification has been completed now. So what I meant by that is how we are very keen to colonize inside. And that has been almost a motif of modern day India because it has reduced our diversity to the gutter. That we are unique because of our differences. We have so many different languages, so many different cultures. For a North Indian or a Nepalese, the story of Ayappa is very strange. And while we do worship Kumara, but not to the same extent. And Murugan is a very new word for us. We only know Murugan. So therefore, this culture. The way what I mean is what we are doing today in the last 20 years or so is we have been colonizing Indian culture itself, in which we are erasing our internal differences in whatever the construction of socio-economic political power. And that has done the gravest disservice for the identity of India the way it is. And in that sense, I would go to rethink through, I would say, what it has done is, I go to Said and all the post-colonial reading, what they have done, all our cultural experiences for Said, all our religious experiences for Said is a subset of socio-political experience. Every single reality is subsumed under socio-political reality. So let me think this way. So then Buddha is trying to simply be a very powerful man because I'm just a villager king, so therefore let me be a very powerful man. And Mahavira is simply trying to do what Prophet Muhammad did because he's also being a hero, heroic. So as long as we are not willing to critique the constitutional power in the way that power itself is viewed as a subset of socio-political power, we are not engaging Indianness at all. And what we are doing is we are doing the same thing. We are repeating the same will that Indian religiosity today has been a subset of socio-political power. And we are using religious institutions the same way that Abrahamic culture uses its religious institutions. We have allowed our entire rishihood to reduce to a socio-political quest for power. And as long as we are not reading, we are not willing to question not just our foes, but also our enemies, but also our friends. Okay? So, as long as we are not willing to question those who present to us as our friends, and only question them who present themselves as our foes, we are not a good student for the civilization that is called Bharat. So then where I would go, I would actually, if I had to cite some Western thinkers for the culture, I would go maybe Jaina or even Mircea Eliade, who did consider this sacred as something, a separate category than simply a political, socio-political reproduction. So I would say then what it is for a rational, post-Indian Renaissance thinking, rationalization of the human. That's what the West has done, and excessive stress on rationality. And I'm very much in the mood to question rationality. I don't think that human beings are, in an absolute sense, rational beings. The excessive focus on rationality that has reduced the study in humanities, that has reduced our poetry sessions, for example, and turned into some mathematical equation for our human existence. I do not think that our reduction of our own existence as a simply rational mathematical thinking, mathematical existence, does a service to what we are. We transcend oftentimes our love, our capacity to empathize, to be altruistic at some occasions when we need to sacrifice all our personal interest for the sake of the good for the other. Those are the things that make us the true humans. And those are not something you can mechanize. You can simply analyze based on chemical reactions. That is what gives us the best of the humanity, in my opinion, is not simply a rational process. So we have to be willing to engage the I would not say simply irrational, because rationality also needs to be examined. What is the point of this logical thinking? Does it have a virtue? What virtue does it serve? I can be thinking philosophy. You know, in classical India, this when Gautama gave 16 categories, and these chala, bitanda, these verbal wranglings, and if you do not have a position to prove, do not enter the debate, logical debate. The idea is that in the postmodern world, in the world of deconstructing categories, what we are doing is we are entering into the same old mathematical paradigm of a pointless argumentation that we already reject the truth, we already reject reality, we have already assumed that every single reality has some or equal validity. I come from America where we really believe in this, that we don't, that is your perspective, this is my perspective. I never lost election and this is my perspective. this is the land I'm coming from. So we have made a mockery of the truth, and as you know, that's a signal of civilizational collapse. And for that, we have to be willing to pick up where the West has left and to be able to think further. And so, just to pick up maybe last point, I don't have a lot to do. And so what does it mean to decolonize philosophy? To decolonize philosophy, as I argued, would be to live it. Because if I'm doing a desktop philosophy, that's one of the things that is driving me crazy to do this So because I get fed up, that's it. All I'm doing is writing about the footnote and thinking I'm changing the paradigm. No, I'm not changing the paradigm. I'm being a footnote, a subset of the paradigm. And then how to rethink. This rethinking does not need to start from the premises that is given within the same colonial framework. And what would be the liberated framework? Just like even before we came to have this beautiful conversation, I said that I'm an Indian and I think, therefore, my thinking, my philosophy is Indian philosophy. Give me a break. I don't think that way. I have to have the ethos of what counts that as Indian thinking. And as long as we are not willing to re-engage our own classical heritage, as long as we are not willing to open these old, millennia-old books and undust them and read once and for all in new light, we are not trying to decolonize our own mind. And I would say the last word on human emancipation, human freedom. So ultimately, whether we call it decolonization, whether we call it rethinking, all we are looking for is a freedom, swatantra, our own freedom to think. And that comes from the word we call pratyavidya, that is from the philosophy of Abhinava Buddha, recognition. And this recognition is such a beautiful concept that in recognition we have number one, memory from the past and the direct experience from now. As long as we are not willing to bring our past to life, to relive in our current modes of experiences, we are not recognizing reality. And as long as we are not willing to recognize reality, we are not trying to discover our freedom. And the freedom is boundless. It doesn't need to be read in some esoteric framework of some mystics liberation and escape from the world. This liberation is very much the liberation from our own socio-economic conditioning, our psychological conditioning, and every other thing that we need to liberate ourselves from. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity, and whatever time allows, I'm here to listen to your perspectives, thinkings, and questions. Thank you, Chai.
It was fantastic. It was really it addressed some of the concerns. Just to quickly say, the emancipatory project that we are engaging in, the decolonization project, is about living. I mean, one of my gurus used to say about Pratyabhidna, it is relearning the learned. Is something that we need to do, and how do we really do it? Is not simply an intellectual project and much larger than an intellectual project. So one has to learn to live that way. It's a fascinating thing. So now this session is open for the question and conversation, observation, whatever. But I wanted to begin with two, kind of concerns. One is little trivia. The one is little serious. The first one is that, see, if our critique, whatever we are trying to build, if it is within the colonialism, then we are getting caught. Which is something that we fail to recognize most often, because most of our questions are derivative of the colonial project. But if you want to be outside the colonial project, you need to have some kind of a deeper understanding of what colonialism is to keep yourself outside. Now, there are limited possibilities for us to do so, that we are struck so deeply to this colonial web. This is the first question. How do we really keep ourselves outside this colonial project? Number one. Number two, about power. I think it's a very interesting issue about, there are multiple notions of power, of which certain notions have become very important. I was just curiously thinking, that's why I said it is trivial. In Indian tradition, if you want to use any term, let's say Shakti, for example. Power is a neutral gender. In Indian tradition, it's a feminine gender. From there, we begin to start looking at how do we think, what is the appropriate way of understanding what we are talking about, because Shakti is of a different understanding to our tradition. I am unclear about this. This is simply random rambling that I am keeping in front of you for the conversation. And others will also add, please.
Thank you so much. This is very true that intellectual liberation is a tedious process. It's like cleaning the sewer system. We have to be willing to make ourselves dirty. For me to find meaninglessness of colonial studies, I had to read like maybe 100 books. And you may come to that conclusion that there is not really a breakthrough as long as I'm thinking through these post-colonial or colonial paradigms. But if you are not willing to read the literature, at least to the limited extent, it will not do the job. It will do actually a greater disservice because you might run into some kind of political absolutism of we are the great people. So that type of absolutism does not do any service. It's just like I have this example. I don't like Tesla, but I'm not like a car model guy. But for someone who makes car models, for him to not like means he has to come up with a better model. I'm a scholar. For me to say I don't like this post-colonial criticism, I am coming with a better model, and I believe this is a better model. So therefore, but for that coming with the better model, I need to know the defects of the existing model, and therefore, a faithful reading is not a blind reading. A faithful reading is a critical reading. The West has taught us to do that, and we can return the favor the same way. And so, the second point would be about power. There's actually a lot that needs to be done from the Vedic. That just like what is Chatra, Brahmas and Chatra, when the Brahma and Chatra are the rice, like we eat. These two powers, the Brahma is one power, the recognition of the truth. I'm not talking about this caste and all this kind of things. I'm talking about the total dedication to and surrendering to the truth. That is one power. And another chapter is the Muslim. So between these two, there is something, both these powers are subsumed in light of that higher truth there. So in the very Veda, the notion of at least a triadic structure of power is there. Some of the, there is actually Giorgio Agamben, who has been his Italian thinker. Agamben, you might like to read some of his notions. It helps, yes, he does a very thorough critique of the modern constitutional power. And I'm going beyond Jacques Derrida. That's a old story. So maybe you may find something. And I do more of Gilles Deleuze, a little elusive, very difficult thinker, but from him, there's one guy, easy read, Manuel de Landa. I have read him very closely, and the idea of assemblies, a sort of a new product. Like a horse riding warrior is like more efficient than the warrior or the horse. There is something additional to the power of that person. So assemblage is a concept that you cannot reduce to the part of what comes in the whole. So that was the notion of the power, but I again think that we have to start reading the notion of systemic reading, historical reading of the idea of power in India, and how this is not just about a subset of political power. And because all the Western readings is about, I think, all the other powers are a subset of socio-political power. And I think that we will be doing a greater service if we were to act on. So I made some efforts in that sense. I'm like throwing some rocks here, throwing rocks there, but I think that if we collaborate in these endeavors, we might make a better impact in this regard. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It was a great talk, sir. And I missed out. You said that there was a book where somebody had written about Indian political power, the philosophy of Indian political power. I missed out the author of that book. So number one was that. Number two was in the middle of your talk. Actually, I wanted to clap at that time, but you said what is the definition of Bharat, when you said we need to start rationalizing and questioning our own philosophies. So I think that is something that we sort of, it's really struck me that we need to question our own philosophies and movement. The third, I think, to the gentleman who said, what is colonization? I think you have read around the work of Saidi Buck and Saidi Buck's work, India, that is Bharat, and talks about what is exactly colonization, because colonization has many flavors to it. There was the African colonization, the British colonization, and we were under the British colonization, which had to be through and so on and so forth. So obviously, where do we start? And the fourth point, which I wanted to mention, and this is something you can correct if I'm wrong, I deal with this bad industry. So there is behavior, there is industry, there is commerce, and there is political. Everything into everything comes together. And there is a subconscious mind which has your philosophy. Which is why many American organizations, many American executives, when they come to India, they say, we really can't understand India. They take something from step 1 to step 5, they expect it to behave the same way that it does in the West, but they really can't get through, because all of us in our, not in subconscious mind, supraconscious mind, have a philosophy that has really not lost the Indianism. Possibly we don't see it is right. I'm not getting into the specifics. I just wanted to comment on that there is a certain behavioral pattern which is different from the West, which is possibly because of some of the philosophy we have. And these are the 4 points that I had to make. And thank you again for the invitation. And the last question, if you can comment. I work a lot on bonding, I work a lot on generative AI. In generative AI, we just mentioned in the saying that it is all about past experiences. So today, I think now and in the future, past experience is not going to be in books. It is going to be in some large language model, in some place somewhere where you get your knowledge. How do you think the world of philosophy and the world of rational thinking is going to change in generative AI?
There were many questions actually, and I think some of them escaped with all due respect. If we could continue the conversation over email, then I would have more thorough conversation and I would benefit from your knowledge. I would like to get the reference of the book you just mentioned in the beginning. I don't think I have read or may not. I don't know at this point. I would like to know from you. There is one thread to even this uniqueness claims. Our way of rationality or rationalization is different. One thing came to the West of the argument of the China mind, meaning because they have such a unique picture of language and they think like their mode of logical thinking goes through poetic thinking at the same time. Some Westerner scholars argued that there is something called China mind, and you know that how dangerous that is to say that there are some type of different people than the rest of us, and these things can be, particularly in multicultural West, these things can be actually counterintuitive and result in ghettoization and exclusion of certain communities. For us to argue that we are unique, we are different, we have to also know in what context or to what limit we are saying we are different, and that doesn't mean that we are absolutely a different species altogether or need to be treated as a separate species unwilling to be in the same human understanding. I would say, therefore, I don't have any serious critique or response to what you have brought. I would say jokingly that let's go to the airport and we'll find Indian mind. Our lines are circular, Western lines are linear. So we make our lines in the places as a circle. So that yesterday in my conversation, a student asked, why are you reading three different commentaries of the Bhagavad Gita of Shankara, Ramanuja, and Abhinava Buddha? We want to just follow one. And that we want to follow one, in my opinion, is a very Judeo-Christian constitution. And that's what I'm saying is when you are given options, Indian way of thinking is thinking through multiple options and not finding somewhere to put your faith on so you never have to. What we are looking is, again, not our willingness to make our own judgment at the time, but we want some document handed down by some prophet or somebody so we could blindly follow. And that is where I'm saying that the rethinking through the lines of the rishis would demand that we do not yet end up making some new commandments to blindly follow. And then the last was this decolonization I made was an observation of how we do not colonize, like in Max Weber's terminology, of our own inside territory, whether that is the linguistic colonization or cultural colonization. And what that amounts to is we recognize our identity in its diversity of thought as well as speech. But there are many points that you have made, and if you could just email me in the return, because I could learn a lot from you in that. Thank you so much.
Sir, thank you for that delightful talk. It was very thought-provoking, and I understand why, Professor, when I was saying that you need 3-4 hours to contemplate after you've heard, and you need to read. So I completely concur to that. My question is based on an instance that I encountered you writing for a premier A-star journal in gender studies. And what I was arguing in the paper was I was contesting the author Adrian Brick, who has worked in motherhood and given ideology of extensive intensive mothering. And I was arguing that in India, per se, motherhood has been a unique site of power and agency versus just fitting into these tight compartment of ideologies. I was talking about independent parenting, communal upbringing of children. So while the reviewer appreciated my idea and point, they asked a pertinent question, and I will read it verbatim to avoid any sort of miscommunication in translation or paraphrasing. So the reviewer said, it is not clear what critical tradition in Indian scholarship is. Is there one which is documented or scholarship? I suggest including a few seminal references of critical tradition in Indian writing when you state your argument about motherhood is a sign of power and agency. So what I have done to build my argument, I have quoted scholars like Nandini Chaudhary, etc., who worked on this, and a lot of other Western references, because I work in the space of gender studies. But initially, I felt the argument is coming from a point where the reviewer is not really aware of critical tradition in Indian philosophy or literature. How do you suggest I should respond to an argument like this?
That's big, and I have to confess, I have not worked on gender studies, so everything you bring would be new to me. And as a naive outsider, I will make just a very simple judgment from my first day experience of being in the West. I think our son was almost 6 years old, and my wife was nursing, feeding the child, and some of my Western colleagues were the guests, and they made a critique that we were abusive to our child, that we were not letting the child to eat food on his own. And that, let's start from this very simple experience. The stress of individuation is crucial to Western way of emancipation. Every conversation on freedom is to rediscover our individuality, our individual uniqueness. And when we start thinking through Indian philosophical perspective, immediately it asks us to question our individuation, that our social actions are always greater than our individual actions. I am not a complete entity existing on my own. I don't exist on my own. My existence is a subset of my collective existence. A mother is not a mother without the child, but also husband and the parents and all the subsets of our working, functioning together. So when a Western mom feels so good of keeping her baby separately to sleep in a separate room, the baby has given his space and freedom to do whatever he or she likes. Is it really that, or the mother has regained her freedom to do whatever she likes? And that is, we have been trying to sever the tie of our connect. The consequence of this type of gender polarity is a modern awakening of a total separation and fragmentation of our connectivity. And why is it necessary for the West? Because it's integral to industrialization. And why is it necessary to industrialization? If families decide on their own, corporations and the governments cannot make those decisions. So we in the university are creating human resources, and if they are independent entities, everybody thinks on their own for their good, then it will be very difficult for social engineering. So these are all the steps for social engineering, for the corporatization of our social reality. But that corporatization of social reality has affected our everyday life, our family life. But again, I'm not done there. You'll have to go to deconstruct the Western understanding of gender, even when they are rejecting. It's just like a subset of the very reading would be the biblical constitution. Go to Genesis chapter 1, 25 through 27, and you'll find what it amounts in the very book of Genesis to be a woman. And so the whole criticism of objectification comes from the critique of the biblical understanding of the woman, the Eve, as an object for Adam. And so therefore we should not, no matter how much secular coloring comes to those conversations, that is still within the same loop, even when they are critiquing the biblical understanding of gender role. And I think that instead of trying to find which book, where it is, that brings me down. I'll close my conversation with one joke. When in 2005 I went to San Diego and went to meet the chair of the Department of Philosophy because I wanted to introduce some courses through philosophy, and he said very genuinely, "Is there any book in Indian philosophy? If so, I would like to know." What would be the counter response to that? Could you tell me if there is a book in Western philosophy? You know, could that be? Yes, there are more books in Western philosophy for modern publications, but if you go outside of the last 150 years, 200 years, and let's start from for the last 2000 years of the books written in Western philosophy, let's not count the books written in the last 200 years and only compare the volumes written in Western philosophy versus the Western, and then we will actually know whether there are books in Indian philosophy or not. But it is completely fashionable to not know. But the beauty is, just like in our family conversation, English is the norm. Otherwise, we are not educated enough. But that is okay for the Westerner to not know any non-Western languages. I have this moment of awakening when I was spending a month or so in Kyoto. I attended every weekly lecture of a professor of Japanese Buddhist professor Katsura, and Soryu Katsura is an eminent Buddhist professor. There were like 15, 16 people attending his lecture, and all the people were at least my age, and Katsura in his late 70s, and teaching some Madhyamaka text. And every 15 minutes or so, one person would stand up and then give like a 5-minute summary in English, and Professor Katsura would continue in Japanese language. And I thought that I had heard that Japanese scholars are not as much familiar with English, and they do more in Japanese language than in India. Only in third session, it took me some time to know who these people were who were attending the class. Each and everybody was highly published scholar. They all had published in English language on different aspects of Buddhism. They were eminent scholars actually, reading from their guru. Number one, just like us, have a guru parampara. They, being very senior professors, were still honoring the Guru and coming to study with him, but they were not studying in English language, even though, including Katsura, everybody was capable of publishing in English and substantially published. That was a very unique moment for me to see that we are far off from that type of intellectual discourse. So I would just like to stop at that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I will just add, when we were writing response to that, she asked me, it's so funny that despite knowing the critical traditions, the kind of literature, the question is posed so peculiar that what to write, suddenly you go blank, as you pointed out. Is there a book on Western philosophy or Indian philosophy? Is that the absurd kind of question? The second important thing that we were talking when her answer was indicating is the notion of agency itself. The way we look because of our relational sense that you exemplify. Because we look at agency in a slightly undermined manner, right? Agency is the thing in the social scientific inquiry. And I think this makes the huge difference in the theorization enterprise itself. So there is almost, I at times feel that, in fact, it is not possible to talk on equal terms. Because our ways of understanding the world itself, the human being itself, is so drastically, radically different. That's my general observation.
Thank you, Chaitra. I am deeply impressed by the Dalai Lama and his Mind and Life Institute. And one of the consequences of this 3-decade-long conversation among philosophers and scientists is one theory of inactivism. This inactivism theory has now gone out of the desk of ordinary thinkers. It is one of the common terms used by biologists, and I think that we may be willing to explore, although the core idea was Madhyamaka dependent origination, but the people who are writing like Ivan Thompson or many other people on that are pure philosophers of biology, and so how some of these categories, they borrow substantial amount of Indian philosophy in the platform, are served in a very secular way for renewal discourse and enhancing knowledge. I think that similar type of ideas are required, similar categories are required for us to reframe our way of thinking. In yesterday's conversation, my student asked, why can't we have it translated all the Gangesha and like Raghunath Tarkalankara, Jagadish Tarkalankara in like what Barton Russell view of mathematical way of thinking, and I said, like, forget Russell, maybe start thinking from model logic, and Jonathan Donnelly actually has done a great service in thinking Indian logic through model logic. So it's just like a new set of mathematical logic, but it was not there. The same way we may need a new set of cultural thinking that is not already there, and that is what philosophy is for. Why I am stressed on philosophy is, all the social studies and humanities are like interpretations, like a case study of most of the mainstream philosophies of our time. So when we are writing case studies or rethinking some of these categories, if we do not have philosophy as a model to think through, then we will still be guided by the same paradigm problem. And therefore, I do believe that we need to redo Indian philosophy first, so that we could start writing our social sciences and humanities through those paradigms. Because like when we know Kantian thinking is completely devaluated, think closely. This is a rewriting of philosophy from a Christian perspective. Oh, Hegel, great, wonderful. No, read closely. I have read Phenomenology of Spirit 20 times. And you will see that the juice of Christian thinking throughout history is sapped within his writing. So it is so easy for us to imagine that Western philosophers are so emancipated from their religiosity. Absolutely, that is a lie. Think Heidegger, Martin Heidegger. Think anybody. I will show you the extent to which Western religiosity is sapped through their thinking, and we are simply borrowing those categories. Ultimately, that's not going to work. We are trying to put the coat of giraffe into elephant. It's not going to work. Thank you.
Sir, I'm in this course and in the decolonization discussion and all. I'm trying to theorize something in the field of comparative religion. I'm trying to understand these, especially by comparing the traditions of Indian traditions, Vedantic traditions, and the Greek traditions. Mainly focusing on the writings of Plotinus and his students and their commentaries on Aristotle and Plato. I can see the idea of self which the modern West is obsessed with so much. That is radically different there. And I can see some similarities also. And can we push this kind of study and see whether we can see the ways in which we can recategorize our philosophical systems as traditions or something like that, and how far can we benefit from this compared to Greek and Indian traditions?
So one of the ways of reading culture is a comparative study, and we have to do it whether or not this will give us the required results, because that's just like we all are doing individual efforts, we are making our own efforts, and it is necessary. Particularly thinking through Greek categories for me is not very different from thinking through Hindu categories. But thinking through contemporary Western religious categories and the ways religious studies departments are framed in a very pseudo-secular manner is a very problematic one. So what I find is like one example I'll give you, God, Ishvara and Brahman. I wrote a paper. I was a little embarrassed because Professor Sridhar was going to ask when is it going to be published, and let me tell you the whole genesis of that paper. I got an invitation from those guys who were submitting for the journal, and I gave a presentation, and invited papers are accepted much easier. Then when it went through the review process, I had the most traumatizing experience ever. Because what they were thinking was I would write something to, blend the paradigms. I wrote that these three categories, God, Ishvara, and Brahman, are not reducible to each others, and I was reading Christian literature for understanding God, and I was reading Vedanta and Yoga Sutra for reading the categories Ishvara and the Brahman, and I was giving the core translation from the text themselves to show how far apart these categories were. And then I could see, like, one round is everybody goes through, and the second round some of us go through, and then the third round the reviewer dropped out, and they had to have a new reviewer because I also decided I was not going to give up. Let me see the extent, because it's a logical thing. We are playing a game. We are playing a game. Let me see. It's a logical thing, you know. And it's ultimately they have to give up because everything they ask, I'm responding, but I'm not losing my ground. And then, yeah, finally it's gone. So the idea is when you are doing a comparison, I call it a hermeneutics of difference. I find that more powerful than hermeneutics of identity because most comparative studies just quickly go to find something in common, a type of perennial fantasy that Elder Huxley type scholars would argue that drug-induced mystical experience and Rishi's experience are the same, that the same way the prophetic and yogic experience are all the same. So this type of homogenization does not do any service. Even though we may imagine that it brings us closer, a misconceived closeness is very dangerous. You know? So if you and I have differences, right? You and I have differences. So you may speak one mother tongue at your home, and I may speak another mother tongue at my home. And if we think this is our breaking point in friendship, let us not even start our friendship. You know? So that is what I mean by hermeneutics of difference. So therefore, I think that we have to, if we are trying to do any comparative study, any comparative cultural studies, we should start from the hermeneutics of difference. Thank you. We are different people, that's it. And may not be really weird, different people, but therefore there is like a little space of overlap and homogeneity. So that's I agree to that.
So, if there are, I'm sure there are many more questions. Probably we will continue these conversations after the break. He's going to spend some time. We'll go together for lunch and then we will continue this conversation. For time being, we will stop this conversation from this room. Because if you start, we'll go for another. I'm sure there are, I can guess, I can pick the person and say what questions are awaiting there. So, but let's stop at this point in time, and I request Naveen to come and offer the vote of thanks.
In fact, sir, I have read a lot of papers of yours on GSTOR. Most of the times, the Indians book on to that website for papers that are pertaining to our domain. Sthaneshwar Timalsina. So, the day before yesterday, or perhaps in the last week, end of the last week, when we received a message in our faculty group that Sthaneshwar Timalsina is going to be here in Bangalore and is going to be in our campus. That message was by Professor Sthaneshwar. I was amazed. Sir is going to be there. For the first time, I am listening to you directly, and it was very impressive. So, you started with Panini, and then moved on to Katyayana, and then to Bhashyakara Patanjali, and then said Katyayana or Patanjali did not completely agree with Panini. They did not do the criticism of Panini, but they added, their points. They did original works. So, but just by reading Doniger or criticizing her works, we are not going to do anything to India, but we will be adding more. Perhaps we are helping them to sell their books more. That was the major point that you brought in the beginning. Sir, this faculty group and researchers group is so much thankful to you on behalf of both the centers who organized this event in this university, the Center for Study of Cultures and Center for Indian Knowledge Systems, we extend our heartfelt gratitude to you. Very knowledgeable team is with us for this conference today. To all of those from our center and Trust Center, we extend heartfelt thanks. And of course, the heads of both the centers, Professor Chandra and Professor Vinay Chandraji and Sridharji, for all of them, our heartfelt gratitudes. And I request Professor Chandra to hand over a small token of gratitude from our university to Professor Sthaneshwar.